Good evening. This is a meeting of the Montague Finance Committee. It's Wednesday, July 24th, 2019. And the meeting is being recorded by MCTV. Is anyone else planning to record this meeting? And in attendance, we have 4 members of the Finance Committee: Carolyn Olson, Town Accountant; Steve Ellis, Town Administrator; and no one in the audience at present. So, first order of business is to review and approve the minutes of July 10th, our last meeting.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
You ready? Fred? Were there any, I know I sent Carolyn a few changes. Were there any changes besides those?
I think so. I think you and John had both sent me some changes, and when I resent it, everything in it, all the changes incorporated.
I don't think I got that version of the changes incorporated, but that's what's in the packet.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the minutes? Okay. So,
I'll move acceptance.
I think Greg moved
Oh,
already.
sorry.
So we'll vote.
Second.
All right, all in favor of accepting the minutes of July 10th, 2019?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So that's unanimous. And the next item of business is to review our meeting rules and norms. So this is something that I put on the agenda because I thought it might be helpful for us and also for the public to have a sense of how the finance committee does its business. I did not get this to you in advance of the meeting, so I'm going to hand it out now and give you a minute to read it. But basically what this is a document that captures my observations about how we try to do our business.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm hoping we can do tonight is make suggestions or ask questions if there are things about these procedures that you want to do differently. Some of them we have to do this way because they're legal requirements, but been on a couple of different committees and they run their meetings differently. Okay.
I like point 9.
Can you read that one out loud?
I come to the meetings prepared, try to stay on topic and speak one at a time.
That's aspirational, but
Yeah, right.
I hope that's something that we can agree on.
I can agree with that.
That looks good.
No, it looks really good. Thank you for doing the work on that.
I don't think, it's a draft. What I would like to be able to do is to take at least some of this and add it to our section of the website. So
Okay.
that people sort of know what to expect from
Okay.
finance committee meetings. And also, so that prospective new members have a sense of how things work.
If I have any additions or anything, do I send it to Carolyn or send it to you?
Why don't you send them to me?
Sure, can do.
That would be great.
Okay.
And I'm not in a rush
Yep.
to do this, especially since we have a couple of folks who are absent today. But the most important things to me were that I wanted to make sure that we felt comfortable with continuing to have fairly informal style discussion at meetings instead of more formal recognition by the chair.
Yes.
I am comfortable comfortable with that for the time being. I feel like we're a small and
Mhm.
respectful group that's able to assert ourselves when needed and also able to sit back and let other people speak when it's appropriate.
Is there a way of putting this in like a, like it's gonna put it on the website outline form?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doing
So, I
an
mean,
outline form,
Yeah, what,
like
so
with
it,
bullets and stuff.
just the major points, you don't have all the, what I call gobbledygook.
You got it.
I mean, it's good,
Yeah.
it's good.
It's like a brainstorm
Right.
list.
It's good.
It's not sort of.
I think it's called a brain dump.
Yeah.
At best. Stream of consciousness.
Yeah, you know, I'll just offer the comment. We always strive to adhere to the Massachusetts Open Meeting Law. We are not perfect, but to say that we do our best feels like too much of a qualification to me. It is always our objective and intent to adhere.
We adhere.
to the Open Meeting Law.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Doesn't mean we'll never fail, that someone might not bring a topic in that's a little bit outside, and it'll be the chair's discretion to decide when we're gone too far afield,
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good point.
but, okay.
John, any thoughts?
Is there anything in here that we would feel would constrain us if we were to continue this way?
Oh.
It seems to be pretty much the basis that we've been operating on before. One small thing, the last bullet in here, I think in the second line it says if a potential course of action emerges that requires a vote.
Yeah.
I think.
I just saw that.
That's fine.
I'll digest it a little bit more.
Did you have any ideas or suggestions?
No, I thought it was very good.
I have one question. I went to a Board of Zoning Appeals meeting last week as an abutter, and I noticed that they had name tags.
Hmm.
And I've also been to school committee meetings where they do a roll call at the beginning and they all say their names. Would you be opposed to either of those,
We use it like planning board.
ways of
Especially-
letting people who are watching know who's speaking?
My only concern would be that during the budget hearing, the budget process, we might be running out of room on the table with all your
Yeah, I
paperwork,
found that
but
name
we can.
tags were not actually that easy to see if you were sitting in the
Yeah.
audience. So maybe we could
It's
say
a-
our names.
Yeah, just go around the
Yeah,
table.
at the beginning.
that should do it.
Like when we take attendance at the
Yeah.
planning board, we always say our names, because it, Walter records it, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Only time we use them if there's somebody in the audience.
Okay, so Greg, you might digest and send me some more thoughts.
Yep,
That's
yep.
awesome. I think we're finished with that item. The next item on our agenda is to discuss the matter of our need to elect a clerk for the finance committee. We ended our last meeting saying that we were going to try and do some research. Some of us were. I know I have a little bit of information that I've collected. Is there anybody else who has information to report about clerks?
I asked Wendy about how the select board handled the minutes, and my understanding is the meeting is recorded both not by MCTV and also on a recorder, and then the tape from the audio file from that recorder is emailed to the person that actually does the minutes. And then the person has both that and the video from MCTV, as well as email files of any documents that may have been available for which to do the minutes, and then she emails them back.
That's the way Ann does it. She uses TV and her recording, the planning board meetings.
She doesn't attend the meeting itself.
Very seldom.
And the woman that does the select board meeting gets $14 an hour currently.
Do you know how many hours it takes per hour of meeting to produce the minutes?
Not exactly, no. my general sense from looking at her invoices is that it's somewhat comparable to the time of the meeting, but in some cases it may be a little bit extra.
So you could run $42 a meeting, well, $42 to $45, $40 to $45 a meeting. So that would increase the budget. Okay.
That's, I've done it $4,000 or $5,000 a year.
In the case of the select board, just so people understand as well, the select board does not have the full-time executive secretary that was envisioned by the position, and so the time was viewed as the least valuable thing she does on a regular basis from a skill perspective is probably the minutes. So given that we have several hours less of her time than would be expected each week, we sort of shifted that cost, and in fact, for many people who do minutes, particularly if they get kind of transcribey as they do it, which is a fault of many, including myself, the ratio can be much more than 2 to 1 even in terms of time to get it done. Ro does seem to be very efficient, and she seems to be doing a good job of balancing the amount of the total quantity of descriptive text. You know, we try to err on the side of including a bit more than what is legally required, because we want people to read the minutes and understand what was discussed and what decisions were taken and, you know, what happens next as a result of it. And that is also its own art, quite frankly.
Yeah, it really is.
I think if we go that route, we need to probably set some guidelines
Right.
for what we want in the minutes from her or whoever does it.
Well, yeah.
You know, I mean,
I mean, she can follow the general guidelines of the select board too. I mean, if you're satisfied with the work product that's coming out of it now, and the select board is one of the most important meeting minutes that we have on the site. And if you're satisfied with that work project, that work product, then I can't think why we would not also.
And I'm sorry.
We might not because of the cost. Or we might decide that we don't need to have minutes that are that detailed for our meetings.
I think it really comes down to how detailed you want the minutes to be.
I think that's one of the important factors. I'm curious also about how much back and forth there is about the minutes. It seems to me like the select board typically accepts the minutes without making any changes, and I don't know if they send changes to.
You'd have to speak with Wendy about that, I'm sorry, I don't have that. I think they do come in prepared if there is an issue with the minutes, to address the issue with the minutes.
So they do it in the meeting.
Yeah, I think generally that's where that would happen.
Because I think if we hired someone to do it, we would be making our changes to the minutes in our meetings, not
Right.
behind the scenes.
I will just say, as this is the finance committee, that you need to consider the likelihood that any decision you make relative to paying for minutes to be produced may come back to you from 45 committees. You know, I mean, I'll be quite honest, the reduction in actual expected hours of the selectman's secretary was the clear rationale
Gotcha.
for what is an exception.
So my findings from my research, there were two sort of angles that I took. One was, I did speak to some people who I know who are recording secretaries for school committees locally. And what I learned from them is that the going rate is about $80 a meeting. And that in general, the recording secretaries are finding that to be not a fair rate of pay because school committee meetings are getting longer and longer. And so when they figure it out hourly, it doesn't feel great to them. So I don't think we have a great pool of potential recording secretaries. And I would note that the school committees that those folks take the minutes for meet once or twice a month, whereas we might meet 25 or 30 times a year. So it's a lot of minutes, and it could be quite a bit of money that we would need to be able to fund that. the other thing that I looked at was, I looked to see how other finance committees in towns that are, seem similar to
Mhm.
us in various ways do theirs. And what I found, and I put 3 examples in your packet. So there's one,
That's very handy.
from Deerfield, there's one from Ware, and then there's one from Brattleboro, which has a representative town meeting like ours, although it's not in Massachusetts, obviously. So, what was notable to me about these folks' minutes is they're all taken by a committee member. They all use what appears to be a template, although the templates are different, and they're quite short. The longest one is 1.5 pages. And they really focus on documenting what topics were discussed, what actions were taken, and what decisions were made.
Our minutes are very long a lot of times, and they include important stuff. But I think you'd find that a lot of the stuff that's in these minutes, like you have a vote, it's like on this, may not have as much wordage. Voted on money transfer, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
in 1 or 2 sentences. Vote.
Not as useful for the public in that
No.
sort of like, I wanna find out what happened at the meeting years later, I can't watch
Right.
the videotape.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
And I think that sometimes we talk about things that are really valuable to capture. And like
I mean,
this example from Ware really doesn't provide much information
No.
at all, but it satisfies the legal requirements.
I mean, when we did the CIC committee, each one of us did it a little bit differently. Some were better than others. Josh is very good at it. When I did it, I just basically covered what was necessary, and that was it. You know, it was, you know, we can get into a lot of other material.
I'll do a little work,
You know, it's,
because I'm a technology-driven person a lot, as you could tell. And there's got to be, there is a number of good transcription software packages that work with electronic recording.
it's something that is actually recorded as you speak, or
Yeah, it's a recording, but then you
It
use that-
transcribes it.
And then it transcribes it, and you can do a quick edit on it, so I'd have to try it, see how it works. If we had a template, then you could fill the template with that, and that may work rather
that,
efficiently.
that worked
I don't know.
well, and that probably could be actually less expensive over the long run than paying.
Well, I'm happy to donate whatever
Well, yeah.
package I find to the finance committee, that's
But-
fine.
but
So-
it's- But if you weren't here or something, that would probably be cheaper over the long run than.
Oh, yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of companies that use recording software to keep minutes of meetings. They're not physically transcribed like we're posting them, but they keep them, so they have a record of them, both hard and otherwise. So the only thing that I'd have to figure out, which I don't have my head wrapped around right now, is how you could use that template, how you could insert into a template. So just let me do a little work on that,
Yeah.
and I'll dig into it and see if I can find something, because it would be nice if we could just take the audio file, import it, cut and paste what we wanted, or just cut it real quick. Because if you could get it down to having someone do a half hour's worth of work, in my opinion, that's doable. You're not asking them to sit there and type the whole thing out. Just if it can take a half hour, then it would be great. I'm not trying to replace you with a computer,
Oh, that's
Carol,
fine,
but-
that's fine.
It's all right,
Go
she's
ahead.
not union. She has no rights.
And what I have found is that if you use the agenda as an outline,
Mhm.
that you can fill in the kind of major
Mhm. Oh, that's
bullet
good.
points
That's-
and actions
that's a good
as
idea.
you go, and then you might use the transcript for clarifications.
Yes.
Or use the transcript as a sort of, text version
Mhm.
for people who wanted to see but the minutes that we adopted might be something that was pretty succinct. So I'd be happy to have you, explore that, Greg.
Yeah.
And would you be willing to take a stab at being the clerk for our next meeting?
I am gone a lot. That's my only
So
problem.
it's just the next meeting.
Next meeting, fine, yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
That's when, that
Yeah,
would be
yeah,
the time to
yeah.
test it out.
Yeah, this year especially, I think in February, March timeframe, possibly February timeframe for sure, April, I may be going to Hawaii up to a month at a time.
I think,
So-
so what I'm hearing, I'd like to go around and hear how people are feeling about this topic one by one, but what I'm hearing is that, we're gonna continue to explore options for taking our own minutes that
Mhm.
feel efficient and, acceptable to us as a group. Greg's gonna take the lead on the next experiment with that. But the other questions that I have are, do we wanna continue to develop a proposal to pay to have the minutes done? And also, is there anyone here who, at this point, feels like they would like to volunteer to be the clerk?
That, pending a solution.
A solution. So, John, I'm gonna call on you to go first.
The one concern I have is this represents a significant difference from the past in the detail in the minutes. Are we consciously saying that we expect that a reduction in the back and forth, he said, she said, is going to be adequate? Is there any concern from a historical standpoint or a transparency standpoint? Or is this something we can cheerfully?
I guess the question is, how much at the back and forth before a vote on a subject is needed in the minutes?
And that's
I
my,
mean,
that's my
it's
question.
a question, I'm not saying yes or
I
no
can,
either.
I can tell you from my experience, having been here and done the minutes, that there must have been one or two times that someone asked to go back to the minutes to see something specific, but I can't really recall them. And given that the vast majority of the minutes are recorded by MCTV and are available on a website, I would think that if someone was interested in getting the more detailed information of the conversation, there are ways to do that without including it all in the minutes.
I feel similarly. I feel like the purpose of the minutes is to record our work as a body, and that means the conclusions that we reach, and it's not so much who said what. And I do feel like we are lucky that our meetings are mostly recorded by MCTV, and potentially will also be audio recorded in a way that will produce a transcript, so that if we felt the need to go back and understand what the conversation was, that information would be available. But I don't think we need to include that level of detail in our.
I raise it just to make sure that we are on record as saying that we are comfortable going in that direction.
Then make sure you put it in the minutes.
Well, it seems like the general consensus is that we are comfortable trying it.
Yes.
I mean, you can always go change that some other point if we need to.
Yep.
Steve, I know that you have dealt with this
Yeah.
topic with lots of committees. Do you have anything to contribute or help us with at this point?
Well, I'm gonna be honest and say that generally, I think that Carolyn had a pretty appropriate and streamlined approach to the minutes. The bottom line is, you don't need to go to, and then Greg said this, and then Fred said that, and, you know, these three people were on this side of the conversation, and these two. But I think if there is, let's say we're voting on whether to continue the town accountant's discretionary budget, okay? Which I know she's gonna be proposing this year. If we simply said, you know, it passed 4-1, we talked about this and we passed 4-1, that would be adequate, right? If there was a very strong opinion on the part of two of the people, you know, then I would want the minutes to have enough sensibility and nuance to say, you know, that there was an extended discussion of this with strong opinions on both sides. Ultimately, the motion was approved. I say that because it captures more of the essence of what was done, but that also reflects my predisposition. And my predisposition, these guys know, is to overwrite minutes.
Yeah, right.
You know, but I also we use our minutes in the capital improvements committee, for example, as the basis for writing our report in
Yeah.
many instances. You know, we feel like it's really important to capture those rationale. We're not on television, we're not on Vimeo, so, you know, we're a little bit more inclusive. I think if you did what we saw in Ware, I'd be really concerned that that's inadequate.
Yep.
If you do something that is a step less detailed from what Carolyn is providing, but really attends to the fact that people know what was discussed, know the important decisions that were made, and if there are tangents, captures those tangents so that it's acknowledged that they were there, I think you're fine.
Yeah, I think it's Bruce Young who it's Hunter who takes the minutes for Deerfield. And he's got these bullet points on the side of the chart
Yep.
that sort of capture the highlights of the discussion about this is a discussion about line items in their budget. And I thought that was helpful, better than just saying what the vote was.
Yeah, I was gonna comment earlier that I like that format for certain kinds of, that is a very efficient and streamlined format for certain conversations.
Yeah, and that's especially during the budget season and stuff.
Okay, so the outcomes of this conversation are that Greg is gonna take the minutes at the next meeting, he's gonna pilot a method that uses some transcription software,
Which is the 21st, right? Yep.
and, it sounds like for the time being, we are not gonna pursue a proposal to request money from town meetings so that we can hire someone to take our minutes.
I'm kind of, I never thought about the context that Steve gives, which is every 45 of the committee's looking for the same thing.
It's a real work problem. I mean, I think we could make a good case. We could say, you know, we have a lot of meetings, our meetings are long, our meetings, you know, need to be documented, but it's sort of definitely open that can of worms.
There's no secretarial assistance or administrative assistance to the town accountant's office, you know.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna skip item number 5 since Mr. Whitmer is not here. And item number 6 is to discuss potential deadlines for the fiscal year 2021 budget process and submissions related to that. I find it helpful to have a calendar to look at, so I made copies of the calendar for you all if you want. It happens to be the school district's calendar, so it's got some dates blocked out that will be probably not relevant to you unless you have school age children. Or grandchildren.
Never forget that.
Those days aren't here yet.
Not yet, never yet.
So I think what we're really aiming for today is a sense of when are we gonna start, what are we gonna start with? Do we want to try to move some of our typical timing around for developing the 2021 budget? And also, how are we gonna fit in some of the things that we would like to work on that aren't directly related to the next year's budget, or that might lay the groundwork for next year's budget?
When we asked for, CIC committee has some report, it's for September, for next year budget.
So, what the CIC, and I delivered this, news to the department heads. We're basically looking at an October 31 submission date for capital projects. There is a potential pitfall in that. What we've realized is that, in particular for building projects or roofing projects, it could be very, very difficult to get a company to come out and give you a quote in the September, October
Yes.
timeframe, because they are really, really focused on getting, getting their work buttoned up. So in a way, our season, as it has been in the past, seemed kind of better aligned with contractor schedules. But I really believe it's worth a try. I had a conversation about this with Joanne Blyer and Heath Cummings at the Gil Montague Regional Schools, and it probably, that date would be really problematic, I think, for them, because they not only have to figure out what their projects are, their window for accomplishing the vast majority of their projects is when kids are out of school. So they have a ton of major projects that are ongoing. So they're not in a position to start getting a jump on things in August because they're in the middle of things as opposed to getting on a jump on them. They have to go through a layer of approval relative to prioritizing those with their school committee. And so it may make more sense to extend for them that deadline, say, to November 31st.
Sure.
And from a CIC standpoint, that'd be fine. We'll be hearing everything well in advance of having any sense of what we have for resources. Just because of, how the budget really doesn't begin to take as deep shape in late October as would be ideal. But we can really hear the merits of things and think about, our process of prioritization. And potentially make for a smoother, lighter lift. We might be able to make recommendations earlier in the budget process if that's what the finance committee would like. One thing I didn't ask, and we have to be careful here. We have a quorum of the CIC, so we really can't make decisions. But right now I'm very aware that 2 CIC members who are on finance committee kind of like make that their afternoon. We have our CIC meetings on Wednesday afternoon. They have an intermission between them, and then they're able to come here. In a sense, this might stretch out their active season because we'll be more busy in the fall. But everyone seemed in favor of it at the
Yeah.
previous meeting, so that's what our
I think
intentions
it's
are.
what it did is, it doesn't rush us as much, gives us a little more time to consider projects.
Throw things back and say you need much more detail.
Right.
So the recommendations from the CIC committee might still be coming to us in March.
More than likely.
We might be able to bump that up. I mean,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
really, it depends. I mean, the reality is that we like to think of things as tidy and controllable. But big things happen, You find out that a pipe has failed or a roof has failed, oftentimes when you're in the midst of the winter season. And, so it might require addenda if we put it out too early, but I think we could push it up.
Sure. Why not? We'll see.
I'm not sure what the advantage is, whether there are such clear benefits to pushing it up but maybe a little
Right.
bit would be good.
I think the big thing is, especially for members who get both sets of data, the CIC data and the finance committee data, is it gives those dual servers, they're not getting a full dump of every single budget and every single capital project at the same time on or about December 31st, It allows them to be better prepared, I think.
What about revenue? What are our benchmark dates for revenue projections?
I think it's really standard that we generally try and get revenue forecast well before we have any real expectation of state numbers. So that's always gonna be something in flux until the governor gets his budget out. Which is usually not gonna be until after we would ideally wanna have some preliminary numbers. that doesn't preclude us from having preliminary numbers with the understanding that, maybe we've we've level funded everything, hoping that we're gonna have some change, and as soon as we know what it is, we'll adjust for it. Likewise, new growth and stuff, that's another big piece of the revenue assumption, and that's not usually finalized until mid-March. Actually, it's not finalized till the end of June, but our last date for getting the information has usually been about the middle of March, which is also putting us very close to or even past the deadline that we need to have a final affordable assessment number for Eagle Montague. So, that's kind of a case, I think, on how much you want to estimate, or if you want to set those deadlines earlier and just use that as your point and don't worry about anything else that changes upward.
Yeah.
You've,
I'm sorry.
we've tended to use the revenue estimate as a kickoff mark for your budget instructions. If we waited to get revenue, does that affect your letter?
It depends on the likely scenario. If there's no new growth forecast and we feel that, we are reading the economic tea leaves relative to what unrestricted government aid is going to be, and there might be none, right? Then that means a budget goes out, message goes out, and we have to think about being a bit extremely conservative in the budget request. It could be a true level fund as opposed to level services. That requires a tremendous amount of work on the part of department heads to think all those scenarios through. If by waiting until, the end of November, when the assessors have had at least a little bit of time to see what new projects are on the horizon, so they can come up with a preliminary forecast of new growth, then we may eliminate the need to have, that draconian budget scenario and exercise, and it avoids the waste of a lot of staff time. We could put a budget together today with rough assumptions. I don't think I want to invest, a few days of my time, putting aside everyone else's, in putting together that budget scenarios report that I do, which is different from the budget instructions, right? That product becomes very unreliable, and therefore it's not really worth doing. And I think as we move into the fall, we can talk about how important is that document? How does it or doesn't it really inform this committee's work? What value does it or doesn't it add? Because it does take a fair amount of time. Although I find it to be an interesting exercise, there's a lot of interesting exercises to do. I feel like we kind of prepare that about as early as we can if we want any sense of actual assumptions. So we hear there is typically in December, the governor's office receives a set of estimates from a group of economists that they pull together that estimate the state's economic growth for the year, and the growth in those corresponding growth in the receipts becomes a basis for estimating our unrestricted government aid. So I might hear that, it's gonna probably be somewhere between 2.4 and 3.6 based on these 8 different independent economists that the governor convenes. The MMA has someone there at the hearing. I call that individual. I also happen to know someone who's one of the economists, so I called him this year, I think. And they give us the range, and we usually pick the bottom of that range. And it's much better to know that the range starts at 2.4 than it is to just have no idea. That happens in early December, and I think that I was being pretty speculative this year when I put together that narrative report, to be honest with you. We don't know for sure until typically at MMA, the governor announces what the unrestricted government general aid rather is going to be. And that's on or around January 19th, 20th next year. So I don't know if it makes sense to shove the season earlier or not. I'm open to doing it if you think it adds value. My biggest worry is that we all engage in a process department heads and finance committee and start reviewing budgets that weren't developed with the right premise.
Right.
And so I think that's why we've kind of started a little later than we would like, right, in January, still without all the information we need, but it's worked out pretty well the last couple of years.
It has, although you and I had talked about maybe getting the budgets in a little bit earlier,
Yeah,
about mid-December.
yeah.
And I can certainly send out the budget file for department heads to fill out much earlier than that. I'm thinking, are we still planning a special town meeting in October,
Yeah, most likely,
or late September, hopefully?
yeah, I would look at October 1st as a
Okay,
potential
so
target date.
then by November, I would have the numbers for the wage scales for the next year, so I could actually have those out to departments in November for those people that wanted to get a head start, whose budgets don't fluctuate very much. You know, a lot of people can get a lot of head start on it. There's no reason that, as they come in, I could certainly then give them to the finance committee so that they didn't have to wait until everything came in at once. I know you talked about staggering things, but, that would give a period of probably 3 or so weeks for the operating budgets to come in, which I think would be better than all coming in on one day.
The hard part is moving it to the middle of December, which I do support.
Well, I'm talking about just having the, here's
available.
my perspective as being the department head going through budgets for the last 20 some odd years. Except for times of severe economic crisis, you pretty much ask for a level services budget, and if you want something extra, you explain what it is and why you want it. And knowing that if the numbers come in bad, that's the first thing that's gonna be cut, but without having to go through actually having 2 or 3 budget scenarios. I've been through the days, we don't wanna do that again. So you ask for level services budget, that's what most people expect, and again, giving them the, as we have in the last couple of years, if you want to add something, explain it to us, ask for it, let us know what it is, maybe have that go through Steve first, as we discussed previously. The budgets come in. That really is kind of independent of your revenue estimates. Then when the revenue estimates come in, and as they get firmed up, then you can say, okay, this is what our affordable assessment's gonna be, this is what we have left for the town. Assuming that we have enough to meet the basic needs, then you decide, well, how much then do we wanna allocate for special articles or capital projects? Do we wanna cut budgets so that we can do more for that? That kind of stuff can be done independent of the actual department budget heads, budget submissions to the finance committee. And I think that gives you somewhat of that flexibility in the timeline, so you're not doing everything at once. I mean, I'm not seeing huge fluctuations in revenue except for, you know, some unexpected new growth that we've had in previous years, possibly some new revenues from cannabis and meals taxes or whatever, but those we don't generally count on until we've had a year of experience anyway, so they're not going to affect that first year's revenue estimate.
So,
I'd like to get
I'm sorry.
an indication here as the temporary secretary. What direction are we headed in here? Are we headed toward the revenue being done later, or the department spending being done earlier, or both?
I think we can do both, because we can certainly do a bare bones revenue estimate, basically level funding everything, knowing what we do know now that might increase or change, we can account for it. We do know everything else we can pretty much do. We can give that forecast fairly soon, actually. And then have the budgets come in, have them done for December, then as we get the frontal revenues, that'll be during the time that you're actually starting your budget process. You can then decide, okay, now that we know what these numbers are, what does that leave us over here? Is that enough? Do we need to adjust? And then just go through the process from there. I don't think it needs to be that onerous or complicated. But then I've also always felt that a lot of people spend a lot of time and effort trying to fine tune the revenue estimates for state aid and this and that. From my perspective, it doesn't seem to be a terribly valuable use of that person's time. Just because, I mean, even a couple % changes in our unrestricted local aid is not a huge number for us. I mean, it's.
Yeah, I do agree with that entirely. You know, new growth is the
Is much more important.
single biggest factor outside of like additional sort of like fees and other income that might emerge in a given year. So,
The fees are something that we usually can determine anywhere along the line. If there's a reason to change the fees estimate, we generally will know about that.
Well, I kind of know that now, because I've just closed out the year, so I know what the revenues were, so I've got a starting point for what I would project for next year.
Like for the meals tax, for instance, last year we took a very conservative approach to it. It was the first year of implementation. And we looked at, what the first sort of 2 quarters basically of revenue were, and it was conservative.
Yeah.
Now we have a full year, to be responsible, knowing that economics fluctuate, restaurants open and close. We probably never want to budget at 100% on that fee. We need to be conservative with it, but we have history.
I never budget 100% on any of the revenues, because
Right.
you never know what's gonna happen. That's what we have free cash every year.
So it feels like, to answer your question, if I may, we can put together the budget spreadsheet, which contains a revenue estimate, and we can, in gold, highlight, here are the key question boxes, right? New growth, to a smaller degree, unrestricted government general aid, and perhaps, some fees that are in there. The real question, we could do that almost at any moment. We have a ballpark, although I've not received a response from, with a definitive number, for instance, from Franklin County Technical School, but we have a general sense of what the expected increase might be in their budget next year, in the vicinity of $300,000. So, we could plug those numbers and assumptions in at any time. I guess one of the things I'm kind of like drawing back to right now is how useful, I really did spend a fair amount of my time and a fair amount of Carolyn's time verifying some of the dodgier numbers in these things last year, putting together, a pretty nice, well-narrated report that I think was a nice thing for this committee to move through. But I'm not sure that it served any utility
Yeah.
beyond that.
So I feel like I've heard you say that loud
Yeah.
and clear twice in this meeting and a couple of times before, so I really would like for us to take a look at the report that Steve gave us last
Yeah.
year and come back in our next meeting and give him a recommendation about whether we want him to do that level of work in the
What's
future
that
for
report
this year.
again?
It's the budget narrative.
Yeah.
And Carolyn, could you resend it to us without your
And I'm actually not averse to doing the work.
Yeah.
I want it to be useful. I was a professional researcher who prepared reports to sit on shelves. And I always enjoyed, the ones that were useful,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed less the ones that weren't useful,
I mean, my feeling about it, my recollection, my feeling about it from last year was that I thought, this is such a useful document, I wish more people were using it.
Right.
And so the idea that it's just for the benefit of the finance committee, or only the finance committee even kind of knows that it exists, doesn't seem like it's getting enough value out of it. But I'd like to look at it again and give it a little bit of thought.
And I haven't done this, but maybe also take a look at it and consider the fact that it was speculative and didn't reflect where we really wound up from a budget standpoint. How does that impact its utility? What should we think about and do relative to that?
Or if you really want to be blunt, you could actually look at it and go, okay, is there anything in here that changed how we made our decisions?
Right. I mean, I kind of feel like a more valuable report might be a report that is less projective and more actual.
Right.
So-
Well, last year's was very review of the past year and peek forward, and identified, and again, I now have like a template.
Yeah.
And if I'm satisfied with the template, a lot of it is already written, and it's really a matter of updating. But again, it's just about always putting the time where it's gonna be most useful. And I hear what you're saying too, about dissemination. And if it is disseminated more broadly, we put it on the website, we want people to see it. But it wouldn't have been ideal for town meeting because none of the projections would have lined up.
Right.
And the conversation at town meeting wasn't about the previous year. In fact, that was captured pretty well in the improved finance committee report. So,
All right, so John, does that answer your question enough?
I think so, it's enough to record.
I think what I'm interested in for the remainder of this section is, what do we have coming up for our next few meetings? What do we have to look forward to, Carolyn?
Well, that would be the items under the future agenda items on the second page of your agenda.
Yes.
And how much you wanted to, I think John did a rough draft of organizing it as far as when things could be, but on the email that I got forwarded, a lot of the date information looked like it was in some sort of Russian language or something, so wasn't sure exactly when things
I
were
could
expected.
You
read it,
too, John?
So I know what it said.
Have you moved over to the Russians too, John?
What?
It got put in a funny font, but it's still readable.
Really?
Yeah.
Wingdings again.
Well, sorry about that.
That's what Karen told me, but anyway.
in a
Okay.
very limited way.
Okay, so I'll switch over. One of the things that you have is not.
Right, yeah,
will be on there, so that'll be-
I was,
So that'll be,
wondering
the middle of the page we'll take care of later on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to address that question. I think some of it we've already discussed. The cannabis revenue, I don't know when that would be. That's probably something that you would want to discuss before you start the budget process, in terms of how you wanted to handle that.
When they open?
Well, I think their expectation at this point is that they've gone through their initial inspection with the Cannabis Control Commission. They made corrections. They only found very minor deviations from what was required. CCC is supposed to come back out either next week or early August and do a re-inspection. I believe from there, it would then, assuming everything is good, wait for a CCC meeting. So, I'll just say on or about September. I don't know that that is the precise date.
But the earliest it could be would be September at this point.
I don't know that definitively, but it's certainly not gonna happen like in the next 2 weeks or anything like that.
I like what Carolyn, I don't really wanna use cannabis revenue this year, next year. Put in a special fund or something, because we're not sure what it's gonna really be for at least a couple of years.
One of the issues that we've come up with on the future items is sometimes it's what is the actual number, and sometimes it's what would we do when we got the number. And one of the things I've considered in discussing this is, if we know what we're going to do with the number ahead of time, then when the number is available, it's very easy to deal with. And that's one of the things that was on my mind, is that we not defer the decision on what we're going to do with cannabis or ATV revenue or something until the moment it's available, because at that point we're under the gun.
Yeah, right.
Well, and I would propose even kind of generalizing the way that we think about it to be, what do we do with revenue that we anticipate will be temporary but significant? And so, we seem to have a policy like we did with the meal tax, where we didn't incorporate it into the budget for this year. We waited to see till we had a year to.
Yeah, we use some of the revenues because some of them were realized.
I don't remember what we had in the budget about the action, to be
For
honest.
20.
Do we have some? I
And
think
we
it was
decided
okay.
this year that we weren't going to incorporate any cannabis revenue in our budget because we didn't want to count our chickens before they hatched.
I never thought I would hear that at a finance meeting. All right.
The counting of chickens.
I was gonna say leaves before they're unfurled, but
I never would consider cannabis revenue in this year's budget. We're there.
Another area.
We're really there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Another
Make it
area,
Massachusetts.
I don't know, don't really see it on.
It's just, for a surreal moment there, I was like, wait a minute.
But I agree with John that I think that if we have already figured out how we want to handle that kind of windfall or,
Well, yeah, that's,
then we can apply that decision to an actual number when we have an idea of what it
We
actually
can always
is.
change our mind later if the number deviates a lot. But this way, we aren't starting from square one when it's available.
So we will schedule some time for, that feels like it might be one discussion, it might be more than one discussion for the
Mhm.
fall before the budget season starts.
the other thing you'd probably want to do sooner rather than later is the affordable assessment calculation discussion.
Yeah.
the other, the assessment for the schools, you know, like you wrote in the letter or whatever, it's 10 years old. I think it needs to be reviewed. Especially with all the talk about regionalization and everything else,
District agreements.
and an agreement. I mean, I think it's gonna get very complicated and very confusing. Now you hear in Warwick, they wanna start a horseman school. And so,
Are you talking in terms of changing our methodology, instead of having
what was
an
brought-
affordable assessment for Gilmontague to having one for the entire education?
I think, what was brought up with the Civic Leaders Committee, somebody mentioned that when you look at the budgets that the people came up with, it cut the school budget. We saved money overall if we regionalized. But that doesn't necessarily improve your education. So somebody mentioned we should also be thinking about how do we improve the level of education. If we have one level of schools, why aren't they all level 1 schools or level 2 schools?
Mhm.
That's demographics. A lot of that is demographics, and we have no control over that. But are we spending enough on education than we should?
It's always been the
That's a question. It's not
Yeah,
a
right.
statement. I know. And where should are we spending it in the areas that are really needed? Are we really educating kids, or are we just teaching them to go out to get a job?
Yeah, but to be
Well,
fair,
so
the only thing the
it's-
finance committee can do is determine the total
how much
amount.
money.
Total
Right.
amount.
But
But the
I
thing
think-
is, should we suggest a higher amount than we do?
Well, and then I think that, I think we should have that conversation and we should make a decision, but I think there is also the possibility of making an investment in an education that is outside of the assessment. Because perhaps we might have some temporary windfall that we decide we're going to split with the school district, because that's how we do our assessment. Like, there might be some ways that we could make a strategic investment in our schools that would improve them
Well, we-
without increasing,
We did that. with Cursa-
Non-operational, you mean,
Non-op-
like not an operational budget increase,
Right.
but
like a programmatic.
Specific
Program-
investment.
Right,
You know,
right,
investment.
right. Well, that's what we did with Cursa Ridge.
yeah, I would just say that if we're going to talk about tinkering with the assessment figure, remember that it's balanced against the town budget.
Right.
And so I think if anyone is going to propose, as it's only been proposed to increase a school share figure, I'm gonna challenge you to come in with a very clear plan for how we reduce services and programs on the town side. Because, I don't envision us going for a Prop 2.5 override in this community for general operating
No.
in the current environment,
No.
where we've had reasonably well-funded budgets and we've been able to give the district perhaps not everything that it needs, and I will acknowledge that, but more robust increases than what most other communities have been able to give their districts.
I think what it is, it's not so much if a decision is made well, will be made one way or the other, but it is that we hold a discussion.
Yeah, what I would like to do is to be transparent with our community and also the larger community that's looking at these questions about regionalization, is curious about how we run our school system and fund our school system, so that we can knowledgeably reaffirm our commitment to this way of doing our school financing, if that's what we choose, and if we want to make an adjustment, do that from a place of information. It seems to me like, you know, we can make a strong case for saying that since the compact was written, the stability and security that has resulted from having this sort of known arrangement, which is, people, I think on both sides feel is fair, is really valuable. And, you know, if you look at the numbers in terms of the increase in funding that comes from the local community for our schools, every year for the last 10 years, they've gotten a little bit more. And that's partly because we have been doing okay financially.
Mhm.
And so it would be a different story if we were not doing so okay. But part of the reason why we're doing okay is because our relationship with our regional school district is more clear, and they are asking for more money than we can afford. So it does seem like it's an arrangement that's working out on a lot of levels.
We've been sharing our new sources of income between the town and the school pretty regularly. We've not been sort of gathering it all to ourselves and saying, anything new we get to keep. And so as you know, the rising tide really is lifting all boats.
There are some changes happening on the state side too. This is supposed to be a big year for changes in state education funding. And there have been some new developments in terms of the impact of charter school reimbursements, new charter schools on the scene, the increasing popularity of the tech school. And I think, you know, those are some things that have changed that are worth looking at, even if it doesn't change our
Yeah, I think-
decision.
Right.
What happened is, and this has even happened, I saw something on TV, there's a school in Boston or somewhere. It's a college, but it's not a college, but it's all tech. It's basically going in there and learning how to do a particular job or learn a particular skill. And I think that's what has happened into education. That's why you see tech up here and academics going this way, is that we're teaching kids how to punch that button, and that button, and that button, but maybe not teaching them anything else.
Are you saying that that's what the tech school is doing now?
No, our tech school is probably the exception. They do a very good job across the board.
My impression is our
They-
tech school
they do a
is
very good
quite
job across the board.
assertive in saying our students have to meet a lot of academic standards as well as shop standards.
When that school opened up, their academics stunk.
Much better now.
I mean, literally stunk. Because what they did, they took all the money for teachers, put in tech teachers, did not have enough money to hire academic teachers. And it took them probably 8 to 10 years to get to where they are now, or better.
Right, so I feel sort of like we
No,
are
no,
now
no, I was just gonna say, I
having
felt
the
like we were getting off track.
conversation that we,
We're trying to
would
decide
like
what
to
to
have in
talk
the
about.
future, so.
Yeah.
I guess,
Do we have other things for agendas coming up soon? I just wanna have a sense of what we might be talking about in our next
because some of these
meetings.
things I'm not really sure are pertinent to the finance committee, but also I'm not really sure what's intended for like the third and fourth bullet, the early look at next step special articles for recurring policy articles. Is that just getting the numbers for the allocations to different stabilization funds, in which case that'll be part of the budget file? Is that what was?
I'm one of the people that,
Okay.
or maybe I'm the person that suggested that. And it was simply an attempt to say, here are a number of things we can calculate early and set, and we don't have to worry about them again later, because they're based on prior year.
Okay, so you're just referring to the ones that are in the policy, the
Yeah.
financial policies, okay, so that's sort of taken care of. And what about the next step special articles for the DPW garage? what are you looking for result from that?
A placeholder that we keep in our minds, that at some point, the building committee is may come back and ask for something more. It's, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I could address that. I mean, I think the building committee's first recourse would be to go to contingency and any unencumbered funds in the budget. I don't like to, be too optimistic because all sorts of crazy things happen, but presently, we're not anticipating cost overruns in the project, and anything that we might come back to the select board, say, would be spent within existing budget authority and shouldn't require a new special article. In the long range, I suppose that it's possible that once we're settled into the building, that there'll be some awareness of a need that we might have relative to the facility, but it's very hard for me to foresee what that would be presently, to be honest with you. So I'm hopeful that we wouldn't have any. It would be highly speculative for me to bring anything in at this early juncture. At that point, we hope to be, in September, we hope to be completing the preliminary groundwork and laying the foundation. So I don't know that I could offer much early in the process, just to let you know.
This may be a case of something being thought of in the darkness of night and simply carrying on, and if you'd like to have it stricken, we could strike it.
Okay.
Unless, Carolyn, you have things that you know are going to come up for us that we should prepare for, we're good.
One of the things we talked about in earlier meetings was separating the narratives from the actual budget submittal. Figuring that there's some value in having people think in broad terms about what the narrative would require them to do versus the one-year budget. Would it be worth having an earlier deadline for narratives, any narrative changes, so they get that out of the way and they don't have to deal with that at the same time as the budget numbers?
Well, maybe what we should do is take a look at the narrative form before we make that recommendation. Because my recollection is that most of the questions on the narrative form are about explaining changes in your budget document. And then there's one question that really gives people a little bit of space to. So I think that's the place where we were wondering, can we break that out? But the narrative itself seemed like it was mostly an explanation of, this went up because of that, this.
It's an outgrowth of the budgeting process, I think. Does that fit the impression you have had in conversations with department heads?
Yeah, I mean, their budget narratives primarily, as we've changed them over the last year or two, have really moved to answering the questions we would have upon reading the numbers in their budget.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that they would have to have developed the numbers in their budget, in order to have perspective to write the narrative.
Yeah.
One of the reasonable questions would be, if they get the budget in early, can we allow them to submit the narratives a little later? That way we can all look at the budgets, look at the raw numbers, let it pique our curiosity, then we get the narratives and we've already been familiarized ourselves with the budget, so we have like this context, right? Because we all function differently when we have limited time, but I'll oftentimes the narrative's gonna tell me what I most need to know in this budget. It may or may not. So I like the general line of inquiry, John. I think
We're looking for, is there a way to insert a place in the front of the budget development process for people for the departments to, think more years out than just 1 year, and and share their thoughts about where they think things are going. And I know
I would
that
want you to
have a-
talk with department heads about that. My general sense is unless you can tell them that they're gonna have a different set of resources or have the flexibility to reorganize in substantial ways, whatever that might mean, that it's pretty hard for many of the departments to say that. They're going to continue to do their statutorily defined business. And that's what they're gonna do. You know, so I don't think that the story would be that compelling, and it might require a lot of facilitation to get the story that you're really looking for out of that.
If you're looking for like special projects, or special programs, the department ones, it's hard for a department head to really spend the time to write something up and knowing in the end, I'm not gonna get a dime. Because basically, that's a waste of their time, okay? I'm quite sure, I like them to be innovative. If there is something they think is worthwhile, write it up, bring it to us. Maybe not part of the budget process, but at some other time to discuss it. But come to us not just with an idea, but an idea and a plan to accomplish that idea all at once. So basically, I have a plan to do this, and this is how I'm going to do it, and how I'm going to pay for it. I mean, whether or not you accept it or part of it or whatever, they have a plan in front of us.
I do think on some level the special article submission process
Does that.
You know, it says, we really need this new software resource because we're at our wit's end with what we have now. Or, you know, we just can't continue with ballot boxes. They feel too unreliable to us. So I wonder whether they're already expressing a lot of their needs in that process through the special article submission. I don't know if that conforms with what you're thinking of, but
Right there.
Okay. Great. John sent us a message about Massachusetts budget. Thought maybe we could summarize that for the viewing.
That's in your file too.
This came out a couple of days ago. This is not the end of the state budget process, but it's pretty close. What has gone to the governor is a budget of Senate and House deliberations. And my quick look at it indicates that for Montague, speaking just of the municipal side, there's an increase of about $67,000 we expect to get, which is, I think I figured about 4% of that portion of the budget. It's not 4% increase to the whole budget revenue, just the government aid part. What I gather from this is it's good news that it is up rather than down. It's also true that it's not a huge increase, which means that we have not unduly tasked the department heads to come in with a lower number. It's not a final number because the governor still has 10 days to take exception to parts of it. And as I recall, he was out of town when it was sent to him. And so he will probably, in my opinion, take the whole 10 days. The mailing from the MMA, which I attached, lists a number of areas where a change was made. It also spent some time on school-related costs. There was no cherry sheet attached for what the effect would be on the schools, but that doesn't really immediately affect us because they have an increase in their aid, they will not end up with a reduction from the town. We have appropriated the money for them, and so they will, in a sense, use this as one-time money if they're conservative or cautious. That will show itself over time. This is a late-breaking news item, but it's not a matter of great importance. It's a little bit dismissive. This wasn't intended to be that dismissive. It is important that we've reached this milestone. The change is not enough to cause us to go back and revisit anything. If anyone has a question on it, I'd be glad to share my limited knowledge. Hearing and seeing none.
Any other topics not anticipated? I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved. I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, see you on August 21st.